The story begins on a battleground, with a group of soldiers trying to break through their enemies' lines. However, the resistance is too fierce. Luckily for them, Baka comes and Victoria manages to pull a wounded soldier back to their lines, before a shell shattered the magic shield she projected. The other two mages with her wavered and would have fled had not a small voice above them begun uttering prayers. The protagonist, Tanya, took careful aim and obliterated the enemy soldiers in front of them. However, she could not alone change how outnumbered they were. From the imperial capital in Reborn, the military high command had attempted a strategy whereby they pushed back against their enemies on all sides, to give themselves time to build a highly mobile force. Unfortunately, they didn't anticipate all of their enemies mobilizing. In particular, the Rhine Valley was in danger of falling into the hands of the Republic. They knew they had to adjust their strategy. Tanya and her platoon are charged with delaying the enemy, while the Empire's troops fall back. Two of her corporals could not contain themselves and attack the Republic's artillery. Back in camp, she informs the two that she's going to send them home because they can't follow orders. They object, saying that they volunteered to come to the front lines and fight, but she's holding them back. Tanya nearly draws her sword on them, but Victoria interjects. The next day, Victoria learns that Tanya has stationed them in a pillbox at the rear. Victoria interprets it as an act of mercy because the rear is safe. Their next mission was to rescue a mage company who had been pinned down by the enemy. The enemy has a strong aerial contingent of at least 15 mages against Tanya's 4, a single company. Victoria voices concern about the odds, and Tanya muses that losing more new recruits might damage her chances for promotion. She assigns the other 3 in her company to provide support to their main force, and she goes ahead alone to meet the enemy. Approaching at high speeds, Tanya first avoids their initial attacks. And then, like a crack Fortnite player, she shoots down several of the mages before closing close enough to use her bayonet to decapitate another. Several of them try to fly above her ceiling, but she blows past them and pauses to announce, over the radio, a chance to retreat. In answer, they fire on her, which was among the last mistakes they made. Blocking their shots, she invokes her god's protection for the fatherland, and warns her allies to brace for impact, and fires. The single shot destroys the remaining airborne enemy mages. She demands the surrender of the enemy's remaining ground forces. Word of Tanya's performance reached their enemy's headquarters. They call her the Devil of the Rhine. The Empire's military commands learned that Tanya was instrumental in the battle. One of them, Reborn, remembers her from training. He calls her a monster in the form of a little girl. Victoria learns that her 2 fellow graduates that had been sent to a pillbox were dead. When she reports it to Tanya, Victoria learns that's what Tanya had planned all along. A pillbox doesn't move, Tanya said. It's an ideal target for artillery. This girl is pure evil. We flash forward a few centuries, and in 2013, a salaryman in Japan tries his best to stay on the fast track to promotion. He hates that his job is to lay off other employees, but he recognizes that he needs to follow the rules. While waiting for the train, the man he most recently laid off pushes him off the platform into the path of the oncoming train. An easy meal for Truck Han's younger brother. Suddenly, time stops. Hanging in midair, the salaryman tries to understand what's happening. To make things worse, the people on the platform, while staying motionless, begin to hymn in strange voices, and also complain about the lack of faith in humans. The salaryman rejects the notion that God has stopped time just before his death, opting instead to suggest it's more likely the devil. He settles for calling the entity being X. The salaryman says he has no reason for faith because he lives in a society where his needs are met. Whoever the being is, it loses patience with him, and says that because of his lack of faith, his next reincarnation will be his last because of his lack of faith. Further, being X will place salaryman in a dire situation to help him understand the meaning of faith. Time resumes, and train Kun eats. The next face he sees is of a nun calling him Tanya, and trying to push a spoonful of food into his mouth. The orphanage is destitute. Even though he's in the body of a baby, Tanya has all the memories of her previous life. She discovers that this world has magic, and that she has an aptitude for it. Seeing it as an opportunity to improve her chances of living, she enlists in the military in the hopes of becoming an officer. Because of her magical aptitude, she's accepted into the military, and she excels at all of her studies and becomes an instructor, where she thought she'd be safe. Reborn is confiding his career plans to a colleague when he hears an explosion. Investigating, he finds that some of the recruits disrespected Tanya, and she took exception to their insubordination. One of them even tries to physically attack her, but she quickly puts him on his back and points her bayonet at his throat. However, a group of soldiers restrains her. As the last step in her training, she flies north to perform reconnaissance classes. She expects to complete the test, get good marks, and be assigned to a comfortable training position. The Empire's enemy had different plans. In the middle of her training, the class was suspended, and she was moved to active duty, promoted to second lieutenant, and sent on her first mission. The mission begins well enough. Her task is to guide her side's artillery to strike the enemy infantry, and it starts off scattering the troops from the Entente Alliance. Then the Alliance's mages attack the artillery observer Tanya. Realizing that her enemy is the size of a company, she asks for permission to retreat. She's ordered to delay the enemy until reinforcements arrive. Knowing she can't retreat, her hands shaking, she closes her eyes. Then she begins to laugh uncontrollably and flings herself into battle. Her speed helps compensate for her lack of combat experience, until she settles down and remembers her training, and she can put her speed to real advantage. When she runs out of ammunition, she resorts first to hand-to-hand combat, then to what appears to be a suicide attack. She detonates her magic stone to beat back the enemy. She had hoped to escape with minimal injuries in a way that let her commanders know she fought well. What she wasn't expecting was to be awarded one of the highest military honors, and recognized as an ace. After she recovers from her wounds, she's ordered to assume a role in a propaganda campaign where she dresses up in a pretty dress, is plastered with makeup, and has to make a movie that tries to recruit new soldiers. Tanya receives transfer orders to the instructor's unit, precisely the position she wanted. Careful not to appear too eager, she accepts the transfer. She's a little less enthusiastic when she learns she must test new magic crystals. Her first attempt ended in an explosion. The latest test begins with the new 4-core magical crystal. As she climbs higher, its instability forces her to radio back to the ground, asking to stop the test. Of course, the scientist in charge becomes angry at her disrespect for his invention, and they get into an argument. The instability becomes so great that she has to shut the crystal down. Then its support system explodes. Despite Tanya nearly dying, the scientist continues arguing with her after she lands. She only escapes him by checking into the infirmary. While there, she puts in for a transfer to the front lines, where she feels like it'll be safer. Based on her input, headquarters cancels funding for the project. That night, she goes to bed with a feeling of great satisfaction. That is until time stops again, and the nutcracker on her table starts talking to her. It's being X, and it's not happy that she hasn't developed even a little faith. It laments that in previous times, even just talking to a human might elicit worship. When the nutcracker suggests that maybe she'd respond to a blessing or a miracle, she loses her temper and slaps the nutcracker to the floor. When she awakens the next morning, the nutcracker is in one piece on the desk, and she thinks that maybe it was all a dream. Except for the note saying Deus Lo Vult or God wills it. She's called to the testing field again. Even though the main project was cancelled, the scientist has one more Type 95 prototype left, and he wants her to help test it. She's afraid this experiment could destroy the whole testing grounds, but the scientist surprises her by saying he'll stay right there. He received divine inspiration last night, and he's sure this experiment will work. He goes on to say that if they pray to God together, surely he'll bless their experiment. Otherwise, they both become martyrs. The test begins to go badly, and Tanya tries to engage the safety. It fails. Just as the cores are about to explode, time stops again. Being X tells her that if she prays to God every time she uses the Type 95, he'll bless it, and she won't be destroyed in an explosion. Being a pragmatic person, Tanya utters a quiet prayer, and she gains control over the Type 95. It doesn't blow up, and she's able to use it very effectively. At this point, the timeline catches up to the first episode. Even during a combat mission, Victoria continues to not know how to interact with her commanding officer. Back at HQ, Eric can't hide his distrust of Tanya, to the point where his peers begin to wonder why he's voicing such concern about their top ace. Hans von Zetter, Army Chief of Staff, directly confronts him, saying they've already decided on her next assignment. Meanwhile, Victoria is shocked, and more than a little worried, when Tanya grants her a promotion to the officer track. Tanya herself was promoted to First Lieutenant and was transferred to headquarters, where she expects to live a quiet life with warm food. Back at HQ, Hans finds a folder called Deus Lo Vult on his desk. Included in it is Tanya's picture. It seems to have something to do with a new rapid response unit for frontline combat. Tanya settles into her relatively comfortable college life. She carries a rifle to class, and she thoroughly enjoys how everyone has to salute her Silver Wings assault badge. When Captain Maximilian Johann von Youjo, a classmate, asks why she always has her rifle, she tells him that she needs to be ready at all times. In reality, she just wants to be prepared to shoot being X if she ever gets the chance. Tanya's in the library one day when she meets Hans von Zetter, the Imperial Army Chief of Staff. She agrees to his request to meet with her. She's on her guard when he asks about her opinions of the war effort, but she can only evade his questions for so long before she has to answer for fear of offending him. She tells him that she thinks the conflict will grow into a world war, and secretly she enjoys what she sees as an opportunity to increase her status. Tanya overplays her hand, but thinks she recovers when she describes how the Empire would benefit from a highly mobile battalion of mobile mages. She doesn't see the trap when he asks her how she would implement it, and then asks for a written proposal. Hans von Zetter distributes her analysis of the coming World War, along with her proposal, to the senior staff. Eric can't refute the argument, and he recognizes the style of logic behind it. Tanya meets Captain von Youjo in a cafe, where she learns that he has a daughter about her age. He asks why she volunteered for the military. Through his questions, she knows that he has a conscience, and that he's an intelligent man who thinks sending children to the battlefield is insane. She tells him to get to the rear of the conflict before things get worse so he can protect his daughter. After he leaves, she's elated that not only is he off the officer track, thus opening a position for her, but she has an intelligent man with a conscience sympathetic to her. Hans von Zetter receives approval from his superiors to form the highly mobile mage battalion. Eric von Reborn learns of it while in the field and reacts angrily. Meanwhile, Hans asks Tanya for a formal dinner, where he presents her with options for postgraduate deployment. In reality, Hans orders her to establish her mage battalion as quickly as possible. She realizes too late that her earlier ideas put her in line for this position. In other words, she set herself up. She has no choice but to accept the promotion to captain. He warns her that she has a reputation for being hard to work with, and dismisses her with orders to form the battalion as quickly as possible. When she tries to use the huge amount of work as an excuse to delay, she finds that her superior officers have assigned her a helper, Victoria. Tanya is disappointed that Victoria shows up because it means the amount of paperwork between her and getting the battalion up and running is less of an obstacle. Unfortunately, it gets worse. Victoria has requested additional help, so getting through the resumes is even easier. Not one to give up easily, Tanya devises a magical test to screen out mages, and they manage to eliminate enough to put the creation of a battalion in jeopardy. General Hans impatiently orders her to find a way to gather more candidates. He tells her she can use extraordinary training techniques. Victoria is very nervous at Tanya's grin. The trainees head out into the wilderness to begin training. As they are trying to sleep, Tanya awakens them with an explosion, and tells them to expect incoming live artillery fire for 36 hours. Victoria, expecting just such a development, is already digging her foxhole when the shells start to fall. Tanya plans to brutalize the recruits until they quit. Even after 36 hours of non-stop shelling, none of them give up. So Tanya gives them their next assignment. Without using magic, they have 48 hours to get to the impossibly distant next position despite all obstacles. They trudge through the night, sometimes waist-deep in snow, until one of them screams in frustration. His scream caused an avalanche. One of the soldiers gets so much snow stuck in his throat that he can't breathe and appears dead. When Tanya kicks him hard enough in the back to dislodge the snow, the troops hail her powers as supernatural. The trial she had intended to break their spirits welded them even more closely together. They become the 203rd Air Mage Battalion. While awaiting her battalion's orders, Eric orders her to meet with him, and explains that she and her troops have been called to the southeastern front lines. Before leaving the meeting, Eric suggests she learn Dacian, the language of the people of the Dukedom of Dacia. When they arrive in the theater, Tanya can't believe the reports. Dacia has invaded the Empire, and they are transmitting their orders to their troops over an unencrypted channel. Even worse, they are broadcasting that they have no air cover. She can't believe that the Dacian army is so inept. She and her battalion engaged the enemy of 60,000 infantry troops. The attack can only be described as a slaughter. The Dacian army has no concept of air tactics. They fight as if they are up against ground-based troops, and they die en masse. Tanya can't believe that their leadership is so inept. They trace radio transmissions to the Dacian base, and Tanya gives them a chance to surrender. Instead, they attack, and even Victoria says that they're wasting their time trying to negotiate. They kill all of the soldiers except the leader. After ransacking the place and booby-trapping at least one corpse, they press on to the Dacian capital. Locating a huge munitions factory in the middle of the city, Tanya uses her little girl voice to announce their attack and give the enemy a chance to evacuate all to fulfill international convention. Then they lay waste to the factory and the surrounding buildings. Tanya describes the secondary explosions as fireworks celebrating their attack. She orders her battalion to return to its territory. The generals are happy at their latest victory against the Kingdom of Dacia, but they're worried that they're still fighting on two fronts. Kurt von Rudersdorf is keen to attack the Entente Alliance, but they all admit they have a problem with logistics. Hans von Zetter points out that they simply can't support any dramatic conventional troop movements in such a short period. Rudersdorf has a suggestion. Use the 203rd Battalion Tanya's mages. From their base in the southeast, Tanya's troops are ordered to transfer to the north to implement the general's plan. After preparing the troops for the transfer, Tanya confides her suspicion to Victoria. Namely, that the other world powers have become involved and are propping up the Empire's enemies. She doesn't tell Victoria that she suspects Being X is the true force behind many of the developments. On the northern front, the Imperial mages are under heavy attack as they try to defend their supply base. The situation deteriorates quickly as enemy reinforcements and bombers arrive. The Empire's losses mount, and the remaining mages are on the brink of destruction when they receive word to retreat. Their reinforcements have arrived, and their codename is Pixie. After a quick analysis of the enemy, Tanya deploys her forces. To provide greater incentive for her mages, Tanya tells the local command not to launch their interceptors. She and her troops will take care of the bombers. It was a smart move because the enemy was better equipped and trained than they expected. As Tanya's mages redoubled their efforts, the bombers and their mage escort arrive in the theater. Tanya orders Victoria to take her company and engage the escort, while Tanya takes on the bombers alone. The bomber pilots first can't accept that a single mage is attacking them, then they can't believe she joins them at their altitude and speed, before casually dropping a grenade in the cockpit of the lead plane. As the bombers try to retreat, Tanya begins her prayers of power and unleashes her attack. She destroys most of the bombers in her first strike. The rest retreat. As the rest of her troops turn their attention to the remaining mages, Tanya trails one of the bombers to his crash site, in the hopes of interrogating one of the crew. She's disappointed to find everyone dead. Time freezes, and she hears Being X's voice coming from the dead pilot. She fires her rifle anyway, but he keeps talking, saying that the entire world will turn against her for her sins. After he taunts her again, Tanya keeps firing until time restarts. But she doesn't lose her composure. Because she was sure the other world powers would be watching, she searches for and finds an allied kingdom listening post. She utterly destroys it. Later, General Rudersdorf and Colonel Eric arrive to congratulate her and give her the next assignment. Remembering Being X's taunt, she promises to teach all of their enemies a lesson.